Hi, this video is on diversity, and diversity is looking at the wider context of the people that we work with and who they are and the different components such as race, age, gender, sexuality, other areas of life that may cause division to come or discrimination to come. So diversity, a definition of diversity is the differences among people in terms of age, ethnicity, gender, race, or other dimensions, footnote 1. It's also acknowledging that the workforce is made up of different people who have different strengths and talents and different backgrounds, and all of these together contribute to a workplace diversity, footnote 1. I really liked in class, we looked at some slides, and one of them had a quote that I'm going to just read out, and it was by Reed, 2011, footnote 3. And it says, creating an inclusive culture requires a lot of personal housekeeping. In our increasingly diverse workforce, we are younger and older, more diversely educated, more multicultural and lingual than ever before. We need to be upfront about, or at least aware of, the blinkers that we might be wearing. And that really explains the fact that if we are going to be leaders that can lead people that are different from us, footnote 1, then we need to be able to learn how to bring diversity into our culture and how to be educated and understanding of the differences that may come up. I really liked in the chapter reading about another area that diversity increases productivity within an organisation, is that it says it here that this diversity brings a deeper, broader, wider view of the world around them. And teams need to have diversity to be more effective. This needs to be spread over female and male employees. Different cultures will understand their people in ways we will need them on our team. And I really liked that. I took that one thing from the textbook, footnote 1, which is that diversity brings a deeper, broader, wider view of the world. And I think about, having that mixture of male and female within your team gives you the different strengths that come with the male and female. Like, we are different, we've been made to complement each other. So if we have only male, then they're going to be lacking in a whole lot of things that only the females can do, and often more intuitive, more feeling side of things. Whereas the males can sometimes make decisions with not enough feeling or not looking at it from a wider perspective because of just the way they're wired. So of course, a workplace is going to benefit from having a mixture of both male and female, and an even mixture, because with both of the strengths that they bring into the place, it's going to create an even better culture than what they would have had if it was just strongly male or strongly even female. So also I really liked how it talked about, having different cultures within our teams is going to benefit an organisation, because they can bring the understanding of their culture into your workplace to help you be able to be more effective and understand better the needs of their culture. Whereas if you ask me about how a Filipino person, say, for example, what would like to be treated, or what is offensive to them, or what they would respond to well in business, well, I personally, where I am right now, would currently have no idea. But if I was to bring in a Filipino person, they straight away understand the culture of how their people think, because often it is the ways that you've been brought up there's just certain things that are completely different to how we would do them, or how like a Māori people would do things, or it's having that understanding that you gain from having a wider, more diverse selection of people in your organisation will give you that understanding and that insight that you actually need to be more effective in business. Footnote 1. So I really, I thought that really put it into a really good way to think about it. And it even comes with age, like with if we're not discriminating against age brackets, then we're going to benefit from the age, the older people have got often more years of experience or wisdom that they've learned along the way, whereas the young people are bringing in these fresh insights, these fresh ways of looking at things that together, if we can actually figure it out, we can and work them together, it will bring about a more healthy, a more whole organisation. Example of this is there's a book you can do, and it's called Strength Finders 2.0, and it answers, through answering about 150 questions, what your strengths are. And since doing that Strength Finders, it's really helped me to understand how we need to have people that are very different to us on our team, because I look at my strengths and they're great. Like, I'm great at getting things done. I'm great at being focused and pushing and saying, come on, let's do this, and hey, we could go over here. But I'm not great at the hi, oh, you okay, kind of empathy kind of areas, which I am improving in, because I'm focusing on that. But having a diverse culture, not only with age, ethnicity, and those other factors, it's actually looking at it from a personality perspective as well, actually allows you again to have a more whole organisation, which will be stronger because you're focusing on bringing people in who have different strengths and different abilities, so that your team can add those all together and actually be better because of it. I thought that was quite a good example of why we need diversity, because if we have all of the same, all people with the same qualities, all people with the same personality type, all people who look the same, all people that who are the same culture, who are the same age, like how are we going to learn and grow from those around us, apart from the fact that we'd probably annoy each other because we're all so similar. So, but how are we going to service different needs and different clients, and if we don't actually have, again, that full understanding of the actual clientele that we're serving. So I do think that it is actually something you could be quite strategic about when choosing who you bring on board, without that being discrimination, but actually looking at who's the demographic that we're serving, and how can we be the most understanding and have the most knowledge and the most insight that we need to actually be servicing these people well and understanding who they are. I would like to talk about the cultural context continuum examples, and in class we looked at this, and it talked about there being high context and low context, and it was basically an example of how much you will know if you've done something wrong within a country. Footnote 2. And I found this really interesting, and I found this interesting because I always prefer to know where I stand with people, and if I've done something wrong, I would appreciate that someone just came up to me and told me, rather than talk about it behind my back or not say anything. I find it quite refreshing to be around really honest people. I like to be around different cultures, quite like Americans. I quite like Germans because of the fact that they're so straightforward and they're not afraid to say, hey, I did this really well, or I'm dreaming about doing this. You know, they think it's okay to think big and to kind of put things out there, whereas other cultures may find that to be arrogant. Like I think about Americans can often come across as arrogant because they will go on about what the good things they've done, whereas I don't like it in a bragging sense, but I think that it's good to be able to say, hey, I've achieved this and I've achieved that, in a way that is encouraging others also to dream bigger and to go out and achieve things. I think it really comes, that kind of attitude really comes against that tall poppy syndrome that we see in New Zealand, again, which is actually like discrimination and not creating diversity, because that would say, hey, you've got to all be the same, you've got to all fit in a box. That tall poppy syndrome brings you into this, there's no room for you to be different, there's no room for you to think different, you need to be the same as everybody else, which squashes creativity and squashes down dreams in people that actually are meant to be outworked. Footnote 4. So I liked reading through this because I thought, again, this is another illustration of where we need to have understanding of cultural backgrounds and of how people think and what offends people and what doesn't. I think that actually the understanding what offends people is quite a big part of having of doing business and actually doing it well, because there is, within the cultures of looking at the high context, like the Chinese and the Korean and the Japanese and the Māori, we could be doing things that are so completely normal to us but are so offensive to their cultures. And I've had experiences with this more from, I have friends who live in the Philippines full time, and they have lived over there for quite a few years now doing missionary work, and they have told me stories about how they just had no idea that they were offending someone just by going up to them and saying, oh, did you realize that this happened and you did this wrong? But over there, to do something like that is completely shaming the person, and that person wouldn't talk to them for another 2 months just for doing that one thing without even coming and saying, oh, you did this wrong. Whereas, they've had to learn through living in the culture these unspoken rules and unspoken kind of ways that they think like, that you're just not going to know unless you actually can speak to someone who has experienced that culture to be able to understand better of why this is so offensive. So I thought that was another example of why we need to have that bigger cultural diversity within an organisation. Just in regards to a personal story about a workplace I worked in, I worked as a dental assistant for about 5 or 6 years, and during that time I got hired to work with a South African dentist, and she had been in New Zealand for about 2 or 3 years already and had already been through quite a few dental assistants, because of the fact that a lot of New Zealanders couldn't handle working with her because of her abruptness and the way she worked and the way she spoke. And that, again, was her being South African. She also had grown up quite wealthy and her dad was a dentist, and they had had servants their whole life. So she was used to saying, I want this done, and that person not questioning and doing it straight away. There was no kind of, oh, but why would you want to do it like that? Or even, oh, please, you could have said that in a nicer way. There's nothing, she didn't understand that, because it was like, literally, you need to do this now. so as you can imagine, that didn't go down that well. And she was also, if she had an issue, she would just say it straight. This is wrong. You need to fix it. And when I first started, I found it really hard because I wasn't used to being spoken to like that, and also I didn't understand her manner and why she was the way she was. And as I got to know her more, like, we developed a really, really good friendship outside of work, but in the workplace, it was like she just became this different person. And so over time, I think I benefited from learning how to just follow instructions and how to be really on the ball, because if you didn't, you would know about it straight away. But she also benefited from being around me and with my New Zealand nature. And there was a few times where I had to say to her, hey, look, the way you just spoke to me wasn't appropriate, and I didn't appreciate it. And that took quite a lot because, one, my position is a lot lower than hers, and she was quite a strong personality. But she did receive what I said, and actually the way she began to relate to me changed quite a bit. And I think I look back on that situation, and I think there was a massive cultural gap there, that of how she was brought up, how she would expect a person to respond when she spoke, what her expectations were of people under her, and that in itself wasn't managed as well as it could have been to begin with. I think that if the bosses that she had at the time had sat her down and said, look, in our country the culture is like this, you need to be aware that people here will not respond to this kind of treatment, because this is not how we operate in New Zealand. And I think that it could have saved her a lot of heartache, because I mean, losing assistants isn't easy, but also it would have been a nicer experience for the assistants. But that again was just an example that's of the high and the low context of how straightforward people are, but also of how, merging those two cultures together can be really, really difficult, and that can actually take quite a lot of time. And sometimes it can work, sometimes it cannot, based on how much a person is actually willing to change and willing to accept the different ways that people think and people actually are brought up. Another example is a assignment that I've been doing for the Treaty of Waitangi, and I found that really, really good, of just understanding how we can be more aware of like the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, footnote 5, and how to create diversity. People actually need to, again, I've said this, but need to understand about the other culture and what is important to them and what matters to them. And so I really liked the idea of cultural diversity training being a compulsory thing within many workplaces, and that is literally just taking the time to sit people down and say, we have a large group of people from this culture, and even have it that they come and speak or they come and teach if appropriate, and actually explain to the organisation and the people in the organisation what it is that will matter to these people. So for the Maori people, it's like respecting the tapu things to them, and respecting like the cultural ways that they live and what is sacred to them, and respecting the language that needs to actually be kept alive and still needs to be a part of needs to be a part of how, of our culture, but also looking back at why that is, because I know for me, unless I understand why it's important, which I think probably for everybody, I find it really hard to acknowledge it and to apply it. But if I can understand why it's offensive to do this to this person, and why the language needs to be kept alive because of the agreements that was made in the Treaty of Waitangi, and because who they are as a people and what they wanted as a people to begin with, for an example, I think that it would help people to be a whole lot more aware of cultural diversity, and to create a more cultural diverse organisation. The next subject I'd like to talk about is the glass ceiling, and which is footnote 1, a visible barrier that separates women and minorities between top leadership positions. And this can happen by women not getting top positions, CEO positions, top leadership positions, but it also can mean that women are paid less than men, that there's a glass ceiling in salaries. And looking at this, I found it a little bit hard to completely relate to, because I haven't actually experienced this myself. I've grown up in a family of really strong women, and also I have lots of really amazing women who are leaders in my life, like through my church and through at NMIT, Sam, and like there's many, many people who I'm around, and I haven't actually experienced that being discriminated against. But the question that I asked that I thought was really interesting was, like, why do we allow it to happen? Like, why is it, especially when it comes to the glass ceiling, why is it that women have allowed in some ways them to be treated like this? And as I was thinking this and reading through the textbook, I came across a story from Sheryl Sandberg, footnote 1, and she wrote an article about women work and the will to lead, and she's a CEO of Facebook, and this book has been quite popular, but it's saying that, women in some ways hold themselves back, and by actually not saying, look, I want that for this, and I'm going for the positions that they should be going for, and actually demanding the money, or standing and refusing to budge if the salary isn't as high as what they know their male counterpart may be being paid, that we actually need to, stand up and be confident and say, we're not going to allow this anymore. And she had 4 or 5 points that I thought were quite valid, which they let insecurity hold them back, which was, again, that self-confidence of knowing that, women have what it takes to be in these roles, and that we actually need to grab that and own it and move out in that, and not compare ourselves to men and say we're anything we could do. We can't do a job as well as they could, because we can. And I think, again, if we actually are focused on diversity, then we're actually going to realise that whether we're at the top position, which is what we should be going for, but we're still going to need the males in the place, because actually, it creates an unhealthy culture having only men. It's the same if we had only women. So we actually do need, we need to acknowledge that within that as well. The next point was they don't take responsibility for their success. And it's talking about, society norms and how women should act around the workplace, and it's talking about the tiara syndrome, expecting to be rewarded for good work rather than seizing the opportunity. And it's, again, take responsibility. If you want to be successful, you need to go after it. You need to actually say, this is where I'm going to get to, and go for it. And then the next thing was seeking mentors, and a lot of them won't seek mentors until they're approached. And someone said, I'd really like to mentor you, whereas in her article she says, we should actually be going after those mentors that we want before we're successful, so that we can actually get to that place, which that makes sense to me. And then they leave before they leave, and that's again those decisions that a lot of women make based on having a family. They don't go for those top positions because of the fact that they think they're going to have kids at some point. But what Cheryl brings about is actually, you still need to go for these positions. Even if you're going to have a family at some point, there's no point putting everything else off until that happens. Make the decisions when the baby actually arrives, or change things then, not going for things because of that. And, in our society now, a lot of women are actually forfeiting having babies for careers, which is a personal decision. But also, there are ways that you can take maternity leave and still be working and having a family at the same time, which is a management nightmare, but it can work. So it's, having that mentality of actually, even though this is going to be a part of my life at some point, not putting everything else off because of that. And so that was really one of my strong kind of feelings about this issue is, I could see in the book that it's, these things are happening, but I really liked what she said, because I thought it puts it back on women to go, well, hang on a minute, we're not going to stand for this anymore, and we're not going to accept that pay rate, and we are going to go for that position, and we are going to go in there confidently knowing that we could be we could be just as good as any other person we're up against, male, female, whatever. Actually, that we do have what it takes. So that was that. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Hofstede's cultural dimensions. And it talks about the different levels of dimensions that we see within countries regarding femininity and masculinity, collectivism and individualism, pragmaticness and rule-orientated, collaboration and autocracy. And so I thought this model really identifies the extremes that we can think like, and I think that if we can find a middle ground, which it kind of talks about it, then which will give us more understanding for each side, and it allows for balance. And it just talked about the different countries and what dimensions these have. And so New Zealand was interesting with its masculinity versus femininity, 45%. And then it also had, which had changed from 58%, so we've actually gone down. And then India, which was 56%, which you can still see because of the fact that the woman is still quite discriminated over there in many ways. And the individualism versus collectivism, well, we were 59%, which would probably be because of the Māori culture that we also have within New Zealand being very collective. Footnote 5. So that would make sense on that. And then the uncertainty avoidance, we were 69%, and the power distance 73%. And I thought it was a good diagram to look at, because it really did highlight how things can get out of order and the extremes that things can go to, but that I think ultimately being about middle is actually the best place to be, personally. So I'd like to just finish this video by just with this last kind of thought, and it would be the type of leader that I want to be within a diverse culture, and how I want to lead an organisation to bring about diversity. And my thoughts are, which is a scripture that I like to live by, which is treat other people how you would want to be treated. And this really means that you look at a person beyond how they look. You look at them beyond how they even behave. You look at them beyond like where they've come from, and or even things that you may have different opinions on, and you actually look for the value in every person that you meet and think, how can I value this person because they're valuable, and how can I treat them as I would like to be treated? And I put down here too that each person has value beyond how they behave or what they believe. And that I want to be a leader who can draw out the qualities within every person, not based on outward things, but looking within to the gifts and talents that they have within them. And I think, we shouldn't be, and I don't want to be a leader that will make a decision based on the outward appearance or the background, but I want to be a leader that makes decisions based on who that person is and what the strengths are within them and how that can benefit the organisation and how you can, bring that within and actually acknowledge that a person's value is so beyond all those age, race, ethnicity, sexuality. Like all a person's value isn't measured by those things. Like each person is valuable and needs to be treated with behaviour that honours that value that is within every person. And that's all I'd like to say about diversity.